In the mid-1930s, Europe was standing at the edge of another storm. Adolf Hitler was rising in Germany. Japan had already invaded Manchuria. And in Rome, another dictator was dreaming of empire. His name was Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, the leader of fascist Italy. Mussolini believed Italy was destined for greatness, a rebirth of the ancient Roman Empire. But in his mind, a true empire needed colonies, land, and glory. Across the Mediterranean lay the Horn of Africa, a region Italy had tried and failed to conquer decades earlier. Ethiopia, known then as Abyssinia, stood proudly independent, one of the last free nations on the African continent. The memory of Italy's humiliating defeat at Adwa in 1896 still burned. For Mussolini, it was a national wound that had to be avenged. He promised his people a place in the sun. He promised victory, no matter the cost. In the autumn of 1935, Italian armies began to gather on Ethiopia's borders. From Eritrea in the north and Italian Somaliland in the south, hundreds of thousands of troops, supported by tanks, artillery, and aircraft, prepared to strike. Against them stood Emperor Haile Selassie and a largely unmodernized army, armed mostly with rifles and courage. On October 2, 1935, Mussolini announced to the world that Italy had been insulted by Ethiopia. 2 days later, his forces crossed the Mareb River. The invasion had begun. The Italian campaign was overwhelming in numbers and technology. It was also brutal. The Italian Air Force bombed villages, used chemical weapons, and targeted hospitals and Red Cross camps. The League of Nations condemned the attack, but its sanctions were weak and symbolic. Britain and France, fearing a confrontation with Mussolini, chose not to intervene. By December, Italian forces had advanced deep into the Ethiopian highlands. Mussolini's generals, Pietro Badoglio and Rodolfo Graziani, carried out a war of annihilation. Entire towns were destroyed, and mustard gas rained from the skies. Still, the Ethiopians fought fiercely, using the mountains to launch ambushes and counterattacks. In January 1936, the Italians captured the holy city of Aksum. By March, their armies were closing in on the capital. At the Battle of Maichu, Emperor Haile Selassie led his troops personally. It was a desperate, heroic stand, but the outcome was inevitable. The Italian army crushed the Ethiopian resistance. On May 5, 1936, Italian forces entered Addis Ababa. Mussolini announced to the cheering crowds in Rome that Ethiopia is Italian. He proclaimed the birth of the Italian Empire and himself as its first emperor. But the victory was hollow. Though Italy occupied Ethiopia, resistance never truly ended. Guerrilla fighters, known as the Arbygnotch, patriots, continued to wage war against the occupiers for years. The invasion had consequences far beyond Africa. The League of Nations' failure to stop Mussolini exposed its weakness. It showed the world that aggression could succeed, and dictators took note. Hitler, watching from Berlin, saw that he could defy treaties without fear of serious punishment. The road to global war had just opened wider. Haile Selassie fled into exile, and in June 1936 he addressed the League of Nations in Geneva. Standing before the assembly, he warned, "It is us today. It will be you tomorrow." His words were prophetic. Within 3 years, Europe itself would burn. In 1941, British and Ethiopian forces would return, driving the Italians out and restoring Haile Selassie to his throne. But by then, Mussolini's empire had already begun to crumble. His African conquest, a war fought for pride, for glory, for empire, had become one more chapter in the tragic prelude to World War II.